This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations. I want to take a moment to tell you about a podcast from the Shalom Hartman Institute called Identity Crisis. This podcast is creating better conversations about the essential issues facing Jewish life. It's hosted by Yehuda Kurtzer, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, who sits down with a wide range of guests, politicians, authors, writers, and more to discuss current events, Jewish values, and the big questions facing Jewish life. This podcast has a genuine curiosity and humility about the critical and complex issues, everything from what it means to be a Jewish leader during this divisive moment to the experience of being a Palestinian in Israel today. You will find Identity Crisis enriching and enlivening. Check it out, Identity/Crisis with Yehuda Kurtzer, wherever you get your podcasts. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, June 5th, 1950, the Army abruptly revoked the security clearance of Qian Xuesen, and he was questioned by the FBI. Who was Qian? Well, he was a bona fide rocket scientist. Born in China, he got degrees at MIT and Caltech and was part of some of the most secretive and ambitious weapons and aeronautics plans of the 1940s, technology that helped the U.S. win the war and then set itself up for a golden age of innovation. But then, after World War II, geopolitically, everything started to shift. The Red Scare, fears of a communist China, the Korean War, and here we are with Qian Xuesen losing his security clearance, getting jammed up for almost 5 years, and then eventually being deported and having to return to China. Not for nothing, we will get into this, but in the wake of World War II, the U.S. brought in a number of German scientists with very questionable backgrounds, so the politics here are very interesting and a little twisted. Anyway, listeners, why in the world would we be interested in talking about a story where twisted political doctrine supersedes over questions of immigration, scientific research, and American global leadership? Who knows? Who knows? We know why we would be interested in this story right now. But here, as always, to discuss, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Sometimes the brain drain happens, and sometimes you drain your own brain.
That's right.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So this is an interesting moment in that. But let's get to know the character at the center of all of this, Qian Xuesen. Who is he, and how does he end up in the U.S.?
Sure. So Qian is a genius. I mean, he's born in 1911, and he just has a natural aptitude for science, for mathematics. He comes to the United States in 1935. He starts school studying at MIT, one of the most, prestigious technology schools in the country. And it's interesting because when he gets there, he kind of flies through. I mean, everyone's pretty much impressed with him.
Yeah.
He goes to Caltech to start his PhD. Even his dissertation advisor was like, he's kind of a serious guy. Every question I asked him, he answered with like unusual precision. Like he even helped correct some of his own mistakes or helped address some of his dissertation advisor's own queries and difficult topics. And so this is a person that clearly knew what he was doing at a very, very young age. Everyone saw that he was talented and gifted at what he did.
And it's really out in California where he really kind of makes his name, right?
Yeah, he's studying as a part of this group of people they call it the Suicide Squad, because they were made to handle like these really dangerous explosives, basically, where you could, one wrong move and you could be killed. And he takes this on, and it brings on the attention of the United States military. So they're like, hey, you're working on this interesting research. I think this would be good for our military. He starts doing research trips and getting interested in jet propulsion and jet assisted takeoff and boosters and all this stuff that I don't know anything about. But my husband does, because he knows.
I was about to say.
Do you think he ever wishes he had jet propulsion boosters on the planes he's flying to help him take off faster?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think everyone does.
I know, but if you majored in aeronautical engineering like he did, you know who Qian is.
We'll talk a little bit about how this intersects, obviously, with World War II and then the wake of World War II, and not exactly the same research, but I obviously think of Oppenheimer as I look at this story, and the kinds of people who were depicted in that film and in that story, just like absolute savants, very young, like that was one of the things that really impressed me in Oppenheimer. It's like, oh my gosh, all these people were like 24 years old.
Babies.
Yes.
But I think he fits into that mold of just very clearly a genius from the beginning. I don't know. The only actual person at this level who I've ever known in my life, on his car, he had a bumper sticker that said, "Why, yes, I am a rocket scientist," which I appreciated. But those people are kicking around. And actually, my friend worked at the Jet Propulsion Lab, which is where Qian, after he leaves academia and gets basically poached by the government, ends up being one of the founders of the Jet Propulsion Lab in 1943. He's a Chinese citizen at this point, and we can start to bring in some of the geopolitics here. China is an ally of the U.S. in this moment in the early 40s. He is given security clearance to work on classified weapons research. And he, really rises the ranks, both, I would say, again, another thing I think that was depicted very well in Oppenheimer, both the kind of like actual hard science of it and the political maneuvering that it takes to gain research grants, to get politicians on your side, to work the various panels and advisories and so forth. And he ends up on the U.S. government's Science Advisory Board during World War II. So he's got sort of a, obviously, scientific ascendancy, but also a political ascendancy. Just to wrap up the personal side of his life, he is granted permanent residence in 1947, and he gets married in 1947, and he has 2 kids by 1950. They live in Pasadena. So, he's made his life here. He's made his career here. By the end of the 50s, which is the moment we're talking about now. But, let's talk a little bit, Nikki, about his role in the 40s itself and kind of what he works on and then how that starts to change as the war wraps up.
So he is working on some of the most advanced rocket science that the U.S. is dabbling with in the 1940s. The Germans are pushing forward on all kinds of cruise missiles and rockets, which is important to the air war that both the Allies and the Axis powers are engaged in. And of course, they're also working on bigger and more nuclear bombs. And so all of this stuff is part of the U.S. missile program that the U.S. is in competition with the Germans over, and also trying to entice German scientists to the U.S. to work on.
Yeah. We should probably do a proper episode on this at some point. But I did mention in the intro this other context of the U.S. recruiting talent, scientific talent from around the world, and sometimes with some questionable backgrounds. And so, there was this thing called Operation Paperclip in the wake of World War II, where the U.S. did bring a number of German scientists over to the United States to help. A number of them ended up actually spying, but, that's another thing. And it was later found, or it was kind of an open secret, that a number of these people had been, part of the Nazi infrastructure, were Nazi sympathizers. And so I just say that, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. I don't know if you have thoughts or details, but, just to point out that, in this moment, people were making political rationalizations all the time.
Well, I think it's just a sign of the power of geopolitics to sort of shape individual people's fates. Because a lot of Nazis were being put on trial for war crimes and executed at this point. But because these Nazis had pretty valuable information, because the Nazi regime had been destroyed in Germany and the U.S. was working to rebuild Germany and bring it into its sort of coterie of allies, then suddenly these Nazi scientists have a purchase in the United States and an opening to remake their lives here.
I go back to race all the time, but I just feel like you can't underestimate how much race is a factor in this, in terms of who gets a pass or who looks the other way, and who gets targeted and who gets surveilled and who gets profiled as either being a spy or being problematic. Because if Qian were European, we wouldn't even be having this episode. So much of this was due to the fact that, he was a foreigner, but not just any foreigner. He was the Asian foreigner. All of these ideas about race get heightened. And so he gets given the spotlight, unfairly so,
Right. This is taking place against the backdrop of Chinese exclusion, right? This idea that Chinese people were so different from white Americans that they could not assimilate into the United States. They couldn't be granted citizenship. That changes during World War II because the U.S. is an ally of China in World War II. And because they're allies, they're like, we should change the laws. And now we will allow Chinese people to become citizens of the U.S. We'll welcome them into the U.S. As scientists and in other capacities. And then things change again at the start of the Cold War. And that's where Qian gets caught up in this changing global map, because in 1949, after the Chinese Civil War, China becomes a communist country. You get the establishment of the People's Republic of China under Mao Zedong, and suddenly the U.S. and China are on opposite sides. And it's hard to recapture just like what a psychic blow this was in the United States. The U.S. was allies with the Soviets during World War II. They knew the Soviets were communist. You know, they understood that. But watching China, which is this enormous nation, become communist was terrifying. And then, 6 months later, 7 months later, the Korean War starts and the U.S. gets involved. And suddenly the U.S. is in a proxy war with China, which has major reverberations throughout the United States.
I've got some great news from one of our fellow Radiotopia shows. Ear Hustle, the show about daily life inside prison, is wrapping up an incredible season that took us from the true crime story of a bank robber named Sparkplug to the do's and don'ts of getting your haircut in prison. But Ear Hustle is not resting on their laurels. They are now gearing up for something new and exciting, an all-new 11-city tour. You can join hosts Nigel and Erlon along with special guests and performers. They're kicking off things in Nashville on August 4th. They're hitting Atlanta, Durham, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Cincinnati, 11 different cities, wrapping up in Austin on August 21st. I have seen the Ear Hustle team in action during a live show before. It is a really special, joyous, interactive occasion. And check this out. If you are a This Day fan and you're going to a live show, let us know. Maybe we'll try and connect you with some other fans who are going to be in the house in your city. You can check out all the details at earhustlesq.com/tour. Once again, that's earhustlesq.com/tour. Let me tell you a story, a true story, about my first summer barbecue of the season. Memorial Day, 80 degrees, lovely weather, friends over at my house, I'm manning the grill. I get lots of compliments on the burgers I cooked, but the thing that 4 different people complimented me on, independent of one another, the blue polo shirt I was wearing. It is, in fact, an organic cotton silk polo, which I got for $50 on Quince. If you are gearing up for the summer, you are likely feeling that familiar urge to refresh your closet, but also not waste money on pieces that you'll only wear once or just for one season. Well, when you shop at Quince, you'll find clothes that are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It's luxury without the markup. And if my experience is any indication, you'll be getting nonstop compliments. How about that? Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. When you check in on the news each day, doesn't it kind of feel like every story is a head-spinning economic story? Tariffs, meme coins, budget fights, not to mention groceries and gas prices. Economics is everywhere, fueling our lives even where you least expect it. You're a This Day listener, which means I know you love context and hidden history. Well, Planet Money is the show for you. Planet Money recently did an episode that I absolutely loved, all about the more uncommon economic indicators being discussed on social media. Not just the obvious like prices, but sales of lipstick are going up, babysitter buns are coming back into style. A show like Planet Money is built to dig into all the little ways that economics shapes our lives. Every episode of Planet Money is fun, illuminating, and pretty short, 20-ish minutes, and you'll walk away knowing a lot more about how the world really works. Listen now to Planet Money from NPR. And of course, just this larger context, we've talked about it on the show a bunch, but how every issue just becomes a communist, anti-communist issue, red, blue. And obviously that happens here with regards to China and any notable people of Chinese descent in the United States. And so a target emerges on Qian Xuesen's back, and he gets wrapped up in this. So, there were allegations throughout the 40s that he was a communist, but his security clearance was never really at stake. And then on June 6, 1950, his security clearance is revoked, and he gets questioned by the FBI. There is some. He is caught up in some Red Scare stuff, and there is pressure on him to testify against some other folks, and he doesn't. And so, part of that is the story here as well, the sort of red baiting, but also obviously the larger just suspicion, Kellie, as you were saying, of anyone of Chinese descent. And then there's this interesting moment where he, 2 weeks later, wants to travel home. We should say his wife is basically, she's an opera singer, funnily enough, but she's basically Chinese royalty. I mean, they have ties back to China, even though they've made their life in the United States. So he's going to travel home in 1950. And he, I think it was by all accounts a personal visit, but he packs up some things to take with him. And there's this really fascinating moment where the packing company, basically the moving company, notices that there are some documents that are marked secret or confidential, and they alert U.S. officials. So
Narcs.
I know.
Narcs, yeah.
Snitches.
And so, first off, where was that packing company at Mar-a-Lago 3 years ago? But, sorry. But also, I don't want to read too much into this. It's just an interesting little tidbit that the packing company, would make a great scene in the kind of mini-series. But to the larger point we're saying here, it's the entire country is on high alert, and
Very
so
much
even
so.
down to the movers, they are feeling like they are on the front lines of the red baiting war.
But again, would they have flagged it had he not been Asian? I don't know. I don't know.
Totally.
If the
It's all
suspicion would
mixed
have been
up.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And plus, I think that his Chineseness has to be front and center. But then there's also all of these math equations. And, if you don't know what these equations are, they can look just like secret
Codes.
code, right? And code breaking had been an enormous part of World War II. So it's in this environment where all that heightened suspicion, everything looks like it could be somebody spying or trying to send out secrets, even though later on these papers are examined and there's nothing there. It's just his papers. It's stuff he wrote and published.
Yeah, he said that he was planning to give some lectures when he was back in China and wanted to bring some notes with him. All the papers that were marked secret were stuff that he had worked on himself. It wasn't like they were other people's, information, but nevertheless, it sets off these alarms, and it kind of sets off a 5-year battle. I mean, that fall, he's taken into custody and detained at Terminal Island, which is a U.S. federal prison in Los Angeles. And then the deportation threats begin early in the spring of 1951.
Yeah, he's put under a deportation order and then deemed too dangerous to deport. Right? They don't want to send him back to China because he knows all of this stuff about this technology. And it's in some ways, it's kind of like what happened at Guantanamo, that you have these people who are not allowed in the country, but they're also not allowed to be sent anywhere else. And so they're in this kind of limbo. And that's where he is. So he's in a detention center for a few weeks. And then they're like, okay, we're going to let you out of detention, but you can't leave Los Angeles County. So he's under a kind of house arrest for 5 years while they try to figure out, how do we safely remove him from the country? If we're going to let this guy with all of his knowledge go, we should get something in return. And so they're diplomatic talks for 5 years trying to figure out what the swap is going to be.
Yeah, and all during that time, Shin's morale and faith in the United States is just this gone. I mean, this is a person who probably would have made his life here and would have tried to become a citizen at some point and was completely embedded in his community. And now I imagine at this point, he's like, I just want to go home. I just,
Embittered.
This is not my home. Just send me back.
And he says as much, right? He says, I have no reason to come back. I plan to do my best to help the Chinese people build up the nation to where they can live with dignity and happiness. There wasn't a future for him in the US.
Yeah, and that's in, 1955 when he's finally sent back. In 1955, the Korean War is wrapping up. There's talk that maybe there was a swap for some U.S. airmen, but basically he ends up returning. He gets sent to Hong Kong aboard the SS President Cleveland in September of 1955. And yeah, the press reports at the time show him to be very bitter and disillusioned and actually more than that, now committed to, as you just read, help the Chinese people in the Chinese nation, which of course I'm sure was used to retroactively justify that, and question his allegiances. And so,
but what is he supposed to do?
We see this dynamic. Yes, we see this dynamic play out all the time. The why are you hitting yourself of patriotism?
Yes,
kind of thing.
But also, if you are this profound scientist, what are you supposed to do with all of that information and with all of that genius? Just go write a book? I mean, that's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to do the research. He wanted to do the work.
And he does. I mean, in his time in China, he becomes very quickly because he's the director of a Ministry of National Defense. He works on ballistic missile and nuclear weapons development. I actually read a few pieces in the Chinese press about kind of his return as a welcome hero. And, all the dynamics of him leaving the U.S. were inverted. And in China, he kind of really helped shape up their defense programs.
Yeah. He's seen as the father of Chinese aerospace.
Yeah. So he lives out the rest of his days in China. He continues doing his work. He sort of builds a legacy there. What is the legacy here? I mean, first off, what do we know about the actual allegations that his loyalties were divided, and where does he stand now?
I mean, all of these charges were trumped up. He was never convicted of spying or of any of sort of the nefarious allegations that people had associated him with. And it's the Navy Undersecretary Dan Kimball who has this great quote where he's talking about him and his treatment in 2007. And he says, "It was the stupidest thing this country ever did. He was no more communist than I was, and we forced him to go." And when you think about, on top of that, all that he did, all that he accomplished for Chinese aerospace, how much more could that have been applied to the United States had he stayed?
This is such a great window into how that paranoia and fear and hatred of the early Cold War really did damage the United States, right? You lose this incredible scientist, you push him out of the country. In the State Department, they fired like all of their China hands because they didn't see the coming of communist China. And so you have like a generation of people who understand China pushed out of government. And so you lose all of those folks too. And then the emptying out of people through the Red Scare and Lavender Scare. You're just purging all of this talent for no real reason. And the U.S. pays a price for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, we don't need to, twist ourselves to draw the parallels, and people get it. But there are some recent incidents that are just so evocative of this, including, you have some of the best AI researchers in the world are being denied green cards. We obviously have a lot of the undermining of research funding and the targeting of individuals within universities. This is the kind of, and we see the kind of effect it has. And I think moreover, not just the sort of way the U.S. is hamstringing itself, but the way that these people are going to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Right?
And they're going to use their talents somewhere. I mean, when you think about a lot of these university students that have been targeted, I mean, these are people who are coming to learn in all kinds of fields. And that talent won't be used here.
All right. Well, we will leave it at that. I'm really glad we got to this story. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia. From